Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili Gianarakos. Vasili, what's going on, brother?
Doing well, Yariv. Hope you are too. Just in terms of Flyers news, obviously things are really slowing down now. It's been a couple weeks removed since the exit interviews and just the season, regular season being over in the NHL. So with that, less news for the Flyers, considering they never made the postseason. Unfortunately, Phantoms also are eliminated from their playoff run, which we're going to get into as well. So we have some news to talk about there. Just some general Flyers news in terms of coaching, the coaching search. So that'll be fun to discuss. So it should be a good episode for everybody. Excited for this one. How about you, man?
Yeah. I mean, we're like in this weird period now where we like know the lottery draft positioning. We're through that, and we're kind of in that wait and see mode for the Stanley Cup to be announced. And the only real event we have to look forward to is like the Stanley Cup, and then immediately afterwards there's the draft combine, which is important in this year's draft. It could affect some of the rankings.
Especially like late first rounders and stuff.
Well,
Sometimes that can
Roger
have a
McQueen probably being the biggest one potentially. His status. Um, but we'll talk about that when we talk a little bit about the draft. And it's kind of like just wait and see mode. But I'm still very pumped for the draft, regardless of where they draft. So you know, it's cool. It's the weird wait and see period. Then we have the big exciting period. All the way like through like kind of midway July, and then it's just dead hockey wise. But then thank God it's summer, so we're not there yet. Hopefully this is a pretty busy off season. We got a lot to talk about. We're anticipating that, and then we'll keep it interesting for people as we move forward. Let's start the show. Let me start off with the usual spiel. Just want to remind everybody, please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for notifications to get notified when we release these episodes. And for the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes. Again, liking our videos helps the channel get visibility. It's really the best way to support our show is just subscribing, liking stuff, giving us ratings. That is really like all we really ask of people. And just keep it coming. And we're hoping to bring our numbers up in going into next season, so we hit the ground running. So far, so good. But if you haven't done that so far, please do so now. Also, shout out to our sponsors, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. They have one of the best, if not the best, cheesesteak in Philadelphia. I was just watching a bunch of Instagrams of people eating cheesesteaks, and now I really want one, and Jim's sounds amazing. Make sure to check out Jim's Steaks at 4th and South. Also, Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for your insurance adjustment needs. They will help facilitate the process between you and your insurance company. Make sure you get the best claim possible and deal with all the annoying headaches that come with dealing with insurance companies. Again, check out Summit Public Adjusters, 215-752-0560. And also want to give a brief shout out to our partner, SportsSpider.com. Guys, if you're tired of searching multiple websites for sports news, SportsSpider.com has you covered. They collect the latest articles, videos, and podcasts from around the web and organize them by your favorite team. If you want to stay as up to date as possible on our Philadelphia Flyers or the NHL in general, make sure to check out sportspider.com. The link is in the description of the video and the audio, so check them out. Okay. A little bit of news. This is probably the least interesting thing we're going to talk about. But there is finally a new name going into next season. The agreement with the Wells Fargo Bank has expired, and probably because there is a new arena coming in estimated 3-4 years or so, maybe more. Actually, I don't know exactly, but it'll probably pretty tough to find a sponsor for Comcast. So they kind of sponsored it themselves. So the new building name going into next season as of September 1st, 2025. So the change hasn't happened yet, but it will happen at the end of the summer. Is the Xfinity Mobile Arena. The only way this really affects us is that maybe we've been cursed and there is something to making these changes if you want to get super theoretical about it. And for example, the Phillies and the Eagles both won championships. The Eagles now twice since the William Penn statue has been put on top of the Comcast building. There was this kind of long curse that no building should be taller than William Penn. And then after the buildings got taller than William Penn in Center City, there were no championships here. Um, and then after it was changed, there were some championships. So maybe we could use all the help we can get at this point. Maybe changing the name of the arena will bring on kind of a fresh new beginning, though maybe that'll really happen with the new buildings in the future. Um, doesn't really affect us much, but still interesting, I guess, to some degree.
Yeah, I mean it's cool they changed the name. Like I said before we started the show, I kind of hate all the corporate sponsorship names. I think it takes away from the building being its own entity in general. Like
Yeah.
you had the Spectrum back in the day. Like for example, like a famous arena, I mean, in Toronto used to be called the Sky Dome. They changed it to the Rogers Center. I just think like when you add that corporate tag on it, it just kind of takes away from it. So for them changing to Wells Fargo to Xfinity Mobile, just another like corporate sponsor, but maybe it's just something fresh, something new. So that's cool that they did it. I would say if there was some way they could like have it be a cool name and then sponsored by, that would be
Yeah.
awesome for them to do sports wide. It's just everybody's so focused on, making that, sponsorship dollar that it's probably never going to happen going forward in this day and age, but
Yeah.
just it is what it is, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there is something to what you're saying, especially because they change the name every 20 years, 15 years or so. So you end up calling it like how many people are still going to call it the Wells Fargo Center, even though it's going to be the Xfinity Mobile Arena.
Yeah, like
I will say this, like Comcast is self-sponsoring this time, right? They have a entity of Comcast is Xfinity,
yeah, yeah.
which is like their cable, and this is Xfinity Mobile specifically. Kind of a lame name,
Maybe all the
but maybe
players
just
get
call it the X,
maybe all the players get free mobile plans and phones now. I'm sure they probably already have something set up with Comcast, but who knows?
Yeah, yeah. I don't use Comcast Mobile. Um, but yeah, nobody likes Comcast, let's be honest. All right, let's go to actual hockey news, stuff we actually want to talk about. So we did mention this last time that Noah Cates did have a segment on Nasty Knuckles where he talked about his upcoming contract negotiations with the Flyers. He expected a 99.9% chance that he will end up being a Flyer, and he was excited, meaning that they were somewhat close on a deal. Now it seems like it's been reported by Anthony DeMarco, amongst others, at this point that there is maybe a hiccup with Cates' contract, and that it's rumored, not officially, but that it's heading towards arbitration. Again, this is the first time Noah Cates has arbitration rights. I will say this is a signifier that the Flyers clearly want him on a long-term deal. It is rumored that the Flyers offered him about 3.5 million of 5 years, which is exactly what I put into Puckpedia for the last segment we did on Puckpedia. He apparently wants something closer to 4.5. Probably won't get 4.5, but I assume they'll meet somewhere in the middle. I think we can pretty much assume that Noah Cates will probably get somewhere around 4 million over 5 years, and will probably stay here long term. I can also see, and I would imagine you probably agree with me, they probably won't even go to arbitration, and a lot of time it's kind of used as like a lever that the agent will pull to kind of, it's one of the levers they have to kind of bring together negotiations, because most of the time teams don't want to go to arbitration, not because they'll lose, but because it's kind of an ugly thing. Like you have to like make a case against a player you typically value and see highly, and all of a sudden you have to start talking about all his negative sides while he's there. So a lot of times teams don't really want to go into that process, and I don't think really the player wants to either. So I think most likely you won't head to arbitration. I think they'll come to an agreement probably relatively soon, to be honest with you. And I think it'll probably be somewhere around that $4 million range, which he's probably worth it, especially considering the cap going up, $4 million. At 5 years for a guy who will be a middle six player, most likely a third line center, maybe a third line winger, for a good amount of time and play a critical role in the two-way game of this team.
Yeah, I think arbitration is definitely a tool that like general managers and teams can use in a situation like this to try to pressure potentially a contract getting signed because there's no telling if you go to arbitration as the player if you're going to ultimately get the deal that you're looking for.
Also
It
true.
might not necessarily go your way. And like you said, that's typically a messy situation. The player will have to hear the side of the team into why they might want to pay him less, and it could hurt feelings and things like that. So naturally, it's something you would want to avoid both the team and the player in this situation. For Cates, I mean, I could definitely understand why the Flyers want to go long term with him. Like we said it on last week's episode in terms of third line center. He's essentially a perfect fit, a guy that you could have in that role for years to come. So why not lock that position down now, considering that you want to move forward with him in that role, right? So I think if you look at Cates and his production, for what the Flyers were trying to sign him to, that rumored 3.5, it makes sense just due to the fact that he's really only had this one season producing at that type of rate, right? So if you're Philadelphia, you might not want to pay him upwards of 4.5 billion like he might be looking for in this situation. So we'll see like what happens here. I think if they do go to arbitration, it's not necessarily the worst thing either. And reason being is if that happens, a lot of those times it ends up being a bridge type of deal, like a 1 year or even a 2 year type of deal. So let's say they did do like a 1 year bet on yourself deal. If you're the Flyers, sure, that could hurt you because let's say he reproduces the same season, you might have to pay him more. But at least if you do get him on that 1 year prove it deal, you're also not risking, let's say you signed him to the 4 year, 5 year deal. Maybe he doesn't produce offensively like he did this season, right? Maybe it's an outlier and you could just save yourself as well. So I could see it, two options and it being a good situation for them in both scenarios, right? You sign him long term. He ends up, having similar production over the contract and it looks like a good deal for you. You end up doing the 1 year deal. And let's say he doesn't produce in the same manner that he did this season. You might have saved yourself from signing a long-term deal. So I think in both situations, it could work out for them. I think they'll probably sign him before that, to your point, but you ultimately never know. I mean, with the cap going up, I'm sure his agent and even Cates himself realizes that this might be like a chance to cash in. So
Yeah, and especially because I from everything that Noah Cates said, at least publicly on Nasty Knuckles, it sounds like he wants to be here.
yeah.
And I think the Flyers want him here too. I think they want him here long term on a long term deal. I think they'd be very comfortable. I think this is how it is, and I think Briere's done a really good job of like overall playing hardball. He has not really overpaid a single player so far. I guess the only case you can make for that is like Nick Sealer, but I won't even say he's really overpaid. He's kind of just paid like what a good bottom six defenseman is paid in the
Yeah,
NHL
like
at a veteran level.
with the cap going up, I feel like any decent third pair D man would get a similar type of deal. So yeah,
Yeah,
to your point, Briere hasn't really been one to overpay, whereas Chuck Fletcher was notorious for overpaying both in trades and in contract negotiations as well. So we'll see where it goes. I like I said, either way, I could see it benefiting the Flyers. Right, you sign him long term, you get him at a nice AAV, you have your third line center position locked in. You go to this 1 year let's say 1 year deal in arbitration, and maybe it ends up being a better thing for you because let's say he doesn't have a great season and you still do want to sign him long term, you could get him even cheaper. So
yeah,
who
yeah.
knows?
I agree. That's possible too. He could also have a better season. You have to pay him more, but I really
That's even a better thing for you though, because at least like, hey, even though you got to pay him a little more, at least it's secured that he is this player. Because for me, one season of doing it isn't enough, right? Like you did it one season on a team that really wasn't that great, so you have to figure, if you're playing on a team that's gonna progressively get better and better here, maybe is he even going to get as much ice time to produce as much as he did this season down the line, right? So you got to factor that
sure.
into.
Yeah, that's a solid point. Yeah, I think the Flyers see him as a critical top six, top nine forward on this
Agreed.
team moving forward on a championship squad as
It's
well.
typical like negotiation tactics, probably
Yeah.
by both parties, right?
Yeah, I think he's also a very easy player to trade. And if they sign him now and it goes 5 years up until he's 30, he's on the right side of 30 the entire time of that contract. So it's, as long as they keep him within a reasonable rate, which I think 4 million is a reasonable rate, 2.5 is an excellent rate for a player of his caliber. So I think if they get him somewhere in that middle, it's a win for the Flyers. So we'll see, but I suspect we'll probably I don't think that will go to arbitration. I think he will get locked up sooner rather than later. Um, just the hardball stuff coming out. So, and I don't really have a problem with it. So I do anticipate that Noah Cates. I think the harder one is going to be a guy like Tyson Forrester, who projects to be up a much higher point producer than what he is now. Like he could be a 70-point player in the league. Even, now he's like a 45-point player in the league, where he really has a lot of room to grow and potentially be a 30, 35 goal scorer, playing a very intense two-way game, could be a top line forward on this team moving forward. So that might be one that if they told me he was like, though I don't think he has arbitration rights, but if he was in a similar position, I would be a little more concerned. With Cates, I'm not. But with Forrester, I think that might end up being a bridge deal, just because he might be like, well, I'm going to bet on myself.
And he's younger,
Right.
so
And if they don't see, kind of meet in the middle on like a long-term deal, like I'm sure they would love to get Forrester locked up for 5 years too, but that one might end up being just a 2-year deal at like $4 million. Where, he kind of would bank on the fact that like, oh, I can put up more than this and then get a $7.5 million deal, in the future. Because I cannot see Tyson Forrester. I think he's in a similar camp as Noah Cates, where they see him and Cates as like, no matter how this team changes, these guys are two guys we want to be part of a championship solution. Like I think both of those players are identified as they are here to stay. Where like,
yeah, I
you
think at
know,
least after last season for sure.
right. Where I could see Bobby Brink's negotiation kind of going a little bit different, where they're like, hey, we really like him, but is it time to maybe move on from him potentially and package him in a deal? Where I don't think they're even considering that with Cates or Forrester, where they're like, no, these guys are like, this is exactly the type of players we want here, especially in like a secondary role behind like a superstar. Um, so, the most interesting will be Mitchkov and how much he gets paid. That's going to be,
Yeah, that'll be a completely different
yeah,
situation for
yeah,
sure.
that'll be probably a monster deal when push comes to shove. And okay, the other big piece of news, and this one is, I don't know when this decision is coming. It seems somewhat imminent, as in like within the next 2 weeks is my guess. Probably somewhere around your wedding,
Yeah,
Vasili. I
right.
could see that happening. So the Flyers are still in their coach hunt. But as of this morning, as we record on the 13th, which is a Tuesday, Darren Dreger did have a tweet saying that Rick Tocchet is now pretty much in charge of his destiny. Essentially, he's the one interviewing teams, not the other way around. He seems to be maybe the most coveted, or at least one of the most coveted head coach options around the NHL, and there are a
Not
few spots
surprising.
open.
Not surprising though. Like he's a Jack Adams winner. So very recently. So for the fact that he's sought after doesn't surprise me. I'll read Dreger's tweet here. He said,
Sure.
strong indications this week. Rick Tocchet will soon land another NHL head coaching job. Philly, Boston, Seattle are believed to be among the top contenders. The Flyers want to be aggressive. And then Dreger just says good fit with a period. So he believes it would be a good fit for the Flyers. I mean, obviously, long-standing ties between Tocchet and the Flyers. Anthony Sanfilippo quote tweeted Dreger and stated this: "It looks like Tocchet may have decided to stay in coaching rather than TV. If so, I'm pretty certain the Flyers will make the best offer of any team. It's just a matter of if Tocchet will take it. He has always been and remains their top choice for the job." And we know Anthony's very plugged in with the Flyers. So, I mean, if he happens to say something like that, and Darren Dreger is also hearing that Philly's very interested and the Flyers want to be aggressive, it doesn't surprise me that he is, amongst, if not the top candidate, one of the top candidates.
Yeah, and I don't think the Flyers are kind of like, if we don't get Tocchet, everything's thrown out the window. People seem pretty divided on it. Like I saw Nasty Knuckles had a couple polls set up, which I thought were interesting. And the first one was about Tocchet. Would you be happy? Yes or no? And it was 51% no, 49% yes. And again, that's the Twitter crowd. And then Pat Ferschweiler also was on there, and he was 51% yes, 49% no. So if you're expecting the candidate to be hired for everyone to be in consensus, to be like, this is the guy, that's not going to happen. I've almost never have seen that happen. There are always going to be a segment of the audience that, is going to be unhappy with the person that the Flyers bring in. I will say Tocchet on the surface level does satisfy the older crowd, whether people believe that or not. Rick Tocchet has a very good reputation from his days playing here. I think there's also the audience that thinks he's like too old, also think that, he didn't achieve enough or wasn't a good enough coach. I will say, I think what he did in Vancouver is actually very impressive, that he came into a middling team and took them out of being a team that really couldn't find an identity to being a team that was, up until this year, was really meant to be like a contender. Like they were kind of always underachieving. He shows up, about 2/3 of the way through the season, ends on a winning record, and then the next year he wins the Jack Adams Trophy. I think that's pretty impressive turnaround. A lot of coaches that have not won cups or didn't have like cup runs, they're still good coaches in the league. My whole thing is like he's 61. He's not a younger coach. Does he want to play for a team or does he want to coach for a team that like might not be a contender till like close to the end of his duration here with the Flyers? Having said that, I hear stuff like Sidney Crosby loves him. Again, he won a cup with the Penguins, being a top assistant coach in the NHL, and that
Really
again,
good power play assistant as well for them. So
right, and he still swears by him. They still have a great relationship. So like, and I also see success with a guy like Quinn Hughes. And yes, we don't have a Quinn Hughes here, but we do have two or three young defensemen that are not Quinn Hughes, but they're all like around Quinn Hughes' size, all have offense and mobility.
yeah, stylistically, they'd like to play as like him if they could,
Right.
or
Well,
play as great as they could, as
right.
he could.
He's played, and I love what you just said about the power play. It's something it definitely needs assistance with here. The thing that comes with Tocchet, though, is if Tocchet joins, there's a good chance that Shaw is probably not staying around. Again, if he's kind of picking his own destiny, the idea that a guy who can go wherever he wants can't pick his own staff, that's the one where I'm kind of like, okay. But a guy like Firschweiler, you can be like, hey, this is your first NHL coaching job. We're putting Brad Shaw in there to make sure you have like a smooth transition.
No, definitely. I think with Tocchet, for me, I'm not opposed to it whatsoever. I can see
Yeah,
why some people might be on the fence or might really be against it. Like, sure, you can have that thought process and you could say, okay, like he coached Arizona, not a lot of success, only like one playoff berth, brought Vancouver to the playoffs and they missed this season. There's definitely some things you can point to in his coaching tenure where, there's potential risks with it, right? Because you could bring him in and maybe he has tenure similar to Phoenix when he was coaching there, or maybe something similar happens to him even being in Vancouver. But the way I look at it and the way I tend to judge a coach is listening to like what former players that have played under them say, right? Like I heard an interview with Connor Garland. I've heard interviews with some other, players as well. Obviously like Phil Kessel when he was on the Penguins. Crosby's spoken really highly of Tocchet when he was an assistant. So I just think when you have players of that ilk speaking so highly of a guy, for me, that is like the indicator that I used to say, okay, this would be, a pretty good coach in this situation. I think too, right? A guy that won a Jack Adams, like that's not really being discussed about enough. Like everybody's saying, oh, well,
sure.
he's never gone past, the second round as a head coach before or anything. There's so many coaches, that never made it over the hump until they finally do go on that long run. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're a terrible coach or anything. It might just not have been the situation for them to bring that team, to that level, right? So, for me, Berube is always a great example of a guy that
Sure.
the Flyers had him. Everybody thought he was a terrible coach and, good riddance. Then he goes to St. Louis, does what he does. And now, oh, wow, like look at it. Like he's one of the best coaches in the league and all that. I think, when you're coaching professionals of this ilk, being a former player like Tocchet, I think that's a real benefit. The players can relate to you when you've played before and you were in their shoes. I think that's something, especially too, coming off a guy that like John Tortorella. Everybody assumes that Rick Tocchet's like a tough, hard ass, not a player's coach, but he was a player. And nobody seems to mention that. Like him himself was a player. So don't you think naturally that he is going to understand where the player is coming from? So that's my perspective on it. I wouldn't mind if they hired him. I think he would be a pretty good fit just based on the prior success he's had as an assistant. Um, the deep playoff run he had with Vancouver. I thought he's done a good job, like you said, with some of their stars and kind of bringing out the most of them, like a Quinn Hughes, for example. There's some other players too that we saw on that team take some steps, like a Hoglander got better under him. So we'll see, but I think Tocchet would be a good fit personally, and I do think that the people saying like, "Oh my God, he's such a bad coach or terrible fit," I think it's just being tired of that old Flyers narrative of hiring
Yeah.
the X Flyer, right? I think that's really what it is here, that people just for some reason don't want to go that route of the X Flyer for this hire. And I think that's why they're so opposed to Tocchet.
Well,
Not necessarily because he is going to do a bad job, but it's just because he is that X Flyer.
what's annoying about that though is that the last three coaches have not been ex-Flyers, and it didn't work out with
Great
those
point.
guys either.
Exactly.
So it's like this whole like being
I
down on
don't I don't
ex-Flyers.
think it matters,
Like if it was
especially
Rod
when
Brindamore, would people have a problem with it? No.
no, exactly, right? And I don't think it matters too when you consider like, oh, he's an ex-Flyer from when, like 30 years, like almost 30 years ago now. Like,
Right.
yes, he was an ex-Flyer in the 90s and the
Also an
80s,
ex-Penguin.
but like I don't know if that really is a huge deal into the job he's going to do as a coach. I don't know what him being a former Flyer, I don't know how that's going to make him, a bad coach or anything. I could understand if you're looking at like his strategies and things that he's done. Hey, maybe, he should have done better with that Vancouver team. I could totally understand that criticism, but I'm willing to just, see where it goes and give the guy a chance in my opinion. I,
Yeah.
I think where the Flyers are at, having a coach like him isn't something that's going to like ruin your team or anything. I think you want a guy. I don't think you want a guy who's necessarily going to be super soft because you just had John Tortorella, the hard ass coach. You want a guy that's going to be able to walk a line between both, right? Being
Yeah.
able to be a player's coach, but also, still lay the law down when needed. So
Yeah, I see him as like kind of being the cool guy, like he did have that controversy back in the day where he was kind of like a bookie under the radar, friends with Wayne Gretzky. And,
yeah, yeah.
I feel like he's kind of like Keith Jones in the sense that he's like the cool guy, only like Jones is more of like the jokey guy and Tockett's like the bad boy type of vibe. So I think his overall vibe is probably an identity that this team wants to carry, like the organization wants, is like this guy who's like a hard ass, but like not a hard ass. That kind of in the same sense as Berube, where like he's a hard ass, but he's also a player's coach at the
He
same
reminds
time.
me like him and Berube to me. I don't know. I just
Same
similar
era
styles.
type of
Yeah.
guy. Yeah. So like I think it could work. I'm not saying he's the only option that I would be in favor of, but I think it could work. I think it would also kind of meet that standard that the Flyers have been looking for, is kind of bring back that winning culture that used to be here. And Tocchet was definitely part of that identity. I just want to go through his record real quick. I pulled up his coaching record. So under Tampa Bay, his first season in the league, he was 19 and 33. Again, Tampa Bay was terrible in that era in 09, 08, 09. Then they were 34 and 36. He was then fired after 2 years. Arizona, he was there for 4 years. He was 29-41. Again, this was a terrible Arizona Coyotes team. 29-41, then 39-35, then 33-29. I'm excluding overtime losses. Then his last season he was 24 and 26. So like just above 500 overall, just under 500. He had a 490 winning percentage. And then his success really went to when he went to Vancouver. First season was where he took over a little less than halfway through the season. He was 20, 12, and 4. Then the Jack Adams Trophy year, 50, 23, and 9, 665 winning percentage that year. And then lost in the second round, finished first overall in the league. during the regular season, and then and I wouldn't say they were the best team on paper either in that year. And then this following year, he was 38, 30, and 14, and we knew about the controversy with his team. Injury to Quinn Hughes at one point as well. So definitely some reasons they kind of like lost some talent halfway through the year, losing arguably, his second best player halfway through. So like, I don't think the record is amazing. But if I look at a guy like Peter DeBoer, who is a very good NHL coach, and has an insane record in elimination games. He's 9-0, which is like it's absolutely insane. But his like kind of overall record in like the NHL is a .585. So it's like it's not like insane. And Rick Tocchett's is .516. It's like, you know, and it's half the lengths of Peter DeBoer. So I kind of see as like Tocchet, he hasn't been as coach, he hasn't been a head coach that long. He had success as a um, as an assistant coach. He's kind of had
But
some
that's what I
success as
mean.
an NHL
That's what
coach.
I
So he's
mean,
kind of
right?
improving. That's what I
Yeah.
mean. That's what I'm trying to say. He's been
No,
improving.
but that's totally like realistically, right? Like he was a head coach for 2 seasons in Tampa, 4 seasons in Arizona, so that's six, and then three in Vancouver, 9 seasons as a head coach, three as an assistant in Pittsburgh. Like, think about 9 seasons as a head coach, in comparison with like legendary head coach in the league of like decades of experience, things like that. There's so much ability for you to learn. Like I still feel like, at least for him at this point, like not to say that he's new to being a head coach or anything, but he really hasn't been a head coach for a ton of time. So I'd say there's still time to improve, room to improve, right? So like for everybody saying that it would be like the worst hire ever or anything like that, I mean, I personally don't see that, especially a guy coming off like we said, winning a Jack Adams. So for me, I just think it's more like let's see what he could do in the role if he does get hired versus just automatically assuming it's gonna be terrible or be bad.
Yeah, I think there is this like assumption that we know exactly how well he's going to do. I will say his power play with Vancouver, 22.5 this year, and his penalty kill 82.6, so not bad. Probably why penalty kill was like third in the league, so pretty good. And then power play was middle of the road, 15th. I will say, like, we haven't had a good power play in a long time, so I like the idea of bringing in a guy who's had more success on the power play at least. I don't know. I see the benefits with Tocchet. I also see how the other candidates, people would be excited about them too. But
No,
my
of
whole thing is
course.
like I am tired of pretending like I know what's going to happen when this guy takes over. I do know that there are several players on this team that Tocchet would like to coach. Again, he might not even end up coming here. Apparently, Boston has like a limit that they allow to spend on coaches, and it's not as much as Philly. And then Seattle is like a little more obscure team, just being like not the biggest of hockey markets in the league like Boston and Philadelphia. And it's also, on the West Coast. Does he want to come back to the East Coast? Does he want to stay like near the Vancouver area? And that's kind of close. So, I think it's kind of the ball's in his court. And I suspect he's going to make a decision probably pretty soon. So if he's out, we can assume that the Flyers are still searching, but that they probably will go to their second and their third option. Because I do believe he probably is their top option. I don't think they are jumping to hire somebody without a big name. I think they're open to it and trying to do their homework, but I think the way most sports and entertainment works is that you want to bring in a guy with a big name, and Rick Tocchet at least is a big name with an upside. I think people are definitely over exaggerating, like you said, like it's a horrible choice. I don't understand how it's a horrible choice. It might not be the best choice, but I don't see how it's a bad choice. Just like I don't think that Tortorella was a bad choice for a
Yeah.
a
Well,
coach, and neither was
I
Vino.
just I just see online, and I mean that's the problem, right? When you're online, that's kind
Yeah.
of what we're talking about here. But I just see a lot of sentiments, basically like, oh, he's not great, coaching young players, and he isn't great for the development or fostering of young players in their games. But like I said in the past, I've watched a lot of interviews of former players speaking on him, and they all stated that early in their career he was a real help to them and teaching them how to learn the game, how to play the game properly. So I think, I mean, if when like you said, when you hear players, talk the guy up, to me, that's the most important thing because that's ultimately who he's going to be having the relationship and who he's going to be coaching, right?
Yeah. And I love the ex-player thing. I loved it with the hiring of Briere as GM. I was excited about that, and I love the idea of the coach being that way. It's not like a must for me when it comes to coaching, but he seems like he's senior enough, and has the reputation that players will listen to him, and he's not going to be. And I completely agree with what you said about like I don't think bringing in a nice. First of all, I don't believe in the idea of a nice guy coach in the NHL. I don't understand which coach in the NHL is a nice guy. Maybe Brad Shaw is that guy, though he's never been a head coach in the NHL, really, at least for a full tenure. I imagine maybe he's like what you would consider a nice guy coach, but I don't think a coach should be nice. He should be caring.
You
But
want
I
somebody
think,
to push your players
yeah,
ultimately.
exactly. I
So
think he needs to be kind of relatively tough on you. Maybe not Tortorella tough on you, but like maybe 70% of the way there, with knowing how to ease off of it. But I think of those three teams, the Flyers are like the up and comer a little bit. Seattle is like a step behind them, slightly, maybe a half a step behind them, but not far behind them.
yeah,
And then I look at Boston as being like a
they
retool,
they want to do what
with a couple.
Washington.
Yeah,
That would
exactly.
be their
Yes.
goal is to like,
That's where I
you
see
know,
the appeal for him.
yeah. If they, oh, maybe we can turn around quick. We have Pasternak, we have some pieces
Yeah,
type of
we're
deal,
bringing
right?
in a top 10 pick or whatever. Um, and just with having McAvoy, Lindholm, Pasternak,
You could try to sell him with those types of players
yeah.
essentially, right?
And for all we know, Brad Marchand could re-sign there in the offseason.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I mean?
for
He's having a
sure.
hell of a playoffs right now. I think he has 8 points in 9 games or something like that. So
Yeah, he's a Leafs
Hank's not.
killer. He's a Leafs killer right now with the
Yeah.
overtime goal. It's kind of
Yeah.
crazy. He had another OT goal against them, I think with
Yeah.
Boston. So
Yeah.
like
I
they just can't
I
get away from him.
I am very interested, though, specifically in the relationship that because we have a lot invested in Jamie Drysdale. I mean, when you're forced to trade your second best prospect in the organization and a guy who projects to be a top line player in the league, who, let's be honest here, has already taken steps to be that with a very successful rookie season for Cutter Gauthier. When you trade that type of caliber player and get a guy like Jamie Drysdale, expectations for Drysdale is really high. And when I see what Quinn Hughes, not just because of him, I don't want to give all the credit to Tocchet, but he did facilitate an environment where Quinn Hughes has now become arguably the best defenseman in the NHL, behind like Cale Makar maybe. He's seen a guy with a similar skill set. Yes, Quinn Hughes is the top of the echelon in that skill set, but again, Jamie Drysdale's game could be somewhat not, let's say, comparable in style for sure. That can he take lessons learned from a guy like Quinn Hughes and apply them to Jamie Drysdale? Again, they're about the same size. They're both speedy defensemen, both offensive. Quinn Hughes was taken seventh overall. Jamie Drysdale was taken sixth overall. Does he see something in Jamie Drysdale that he can kind of give that coaching to beyond what Brad Shaw has been able to do? Because he was already trending up. I think that there are several players on this team that I think Tocchet can get more out of it. And a guy like Tyson Forrester, who I wouldn't say plays exactly like Tocchet or anything like that, but he's the closest thing this team has to a power forward right now. And you look at what he's doing with the Canadian team in IAHF, he's playing that role and doing it very well. I saw a beautiful goal he set up for Bo Horvat where he's
Yeah, really
grinding
nice
along the
assist
walls.
today.
Yeah. So, I see options here for Tocchet to be a good influence. So, we will see. I suspect he'll make a decision probably relatively soon. If he has that many suitors and there are three teams and there's money on the table, I never really thought that he was going to take the entire year off to do media or anything like that. What I thought he was saying is like, I'm not afraid to walk away from a deal this year, right? It gives him all the leverage, right? I know I have
Yeah,
a
he can go back to
TV job,
TNT if he
and he's
wants.
getting paid by
Exactly.
Vancouver, right? So
Yeah.
no matter what, he's making what, $4 million this year, three plus
Yeah,
million
exactly.
dollars,
So
and
no
also
sweat off
getting
his
paid,
back, really.
right?
So
So that's the leverage he has this year. Next year might be a little harder for him. So I think he might want to make a decision when he has the leverage, also, which he does right now. There's also what, like 7 job openings in the NHL. That might
yeah,
not be
there
the
might
case next year.
yeah, but there might be more too. Like if you're him, let's say if you wait till after the playoffs are
Playoffs,
done, you might even have more suitors and be able to make the bidding war even more for yourself. I don't know if you want to get into that because it could end up burning bridges between you and other teams, but you
sure,
never know what's going to happen, right?
yeah.
Like,
I mean, the Flyers have been pretty good at getting their guy when it comes to staff, right? Like
yeah,
they brought in Patrick Sharp, right? They brought in John LeClaire. They brought in Danny Heatley. Like they're bringing in big name guys who are former players. And I think this is also another like seller to free agents, right? Like, if you're bringing a no name coach, it's a little harder to sell them on a guy that they don't really know much about. But Rick Tocchet, with his reputation around the league, people like him. I think it also makes it a little bit easier for players to see them. It's kind of the opposite of Torts, where Torts was maybe a detractor to a lot of players. I could see Tocchet being the opposite,
yeah,
right?
Jack Adams, a lot of players obviously interacting with him, like interviews and stuff on TNT, when he was in that role. So yeah, we'll see. I think that's a great point that he might be a guy that can help you draw free agents in eventually when you're looking to
Yeah.
kind of do that. So
Yeah, and if you bring in like a first-time coach, it's a little more like, oh, we're still trying to figure it out. But Tocchet is kind of like, no, we've
well,
made
he's
a decision.
established for
Right,
sure.
exactly. And I don't know if there are many established coaches. Like I actually, and morals aside, I think the Quenneville hire in Anaheim was very smart.
I think that
Um,
was a good hiring for them. Yeah,
yeah, I think
just in
he's
terms
he's
of
gonna
a
get a
young
lot of those guys.
well, I just always look at like I don't understand like the age thing. Like, oh, you can't hire an old coach. Like I look back to Quenneville and those Chicago teams, like when Taves and Kane were coming in the league in, 2008, 2009, they were early 20s. Quenneville was what, how old? Like I don't think age and coaching necessarily matters whatsoever. Like you being in your 60s or whatever, or being in your 40s, I don't think or in your 50s. Like, I don't think the age of a coach ever matters. I think it's what the coach is going to bring to the table in terms of his strategies, his skills, how he's going to actually, interact with the players and coach the players ultimately. Them being an older coach or not, I mean, I feel like that's complete
Well,
bullshit.
I
So,
think too young can be a problem. Like that's where like I'm not as sold on Carl as other people are, just because I'm
yeah,
like,
maybe, but I can even see the other side of it being like, hey, you bring a young coach in, maybe you can really connect with your younger players that are like coming up into the system that are ages 20 to 24.
sure,
Or
yeah,
things
yeah,
like
no,
that, right?
I agree with that too. I just look at it as like, has he experienced enough in his
That's a good
life
point.
in a
Yeah, that's a good point
leadership
as well.
sense? But there are outliers, and maybe Carl is an outlier, right? He's one of the best non-NHL coaches in the world. So, like, is he an outlier potentially? But I even look at Dubas, who I like, right? Like, Dubas was like the youngest GM by far in the league,
And
and
he did a
he's
good job.
he did, but he also kind of fell short. So he's learned, like I'm not saying he's a bad GM. I just mean like how much has he learned over the years from the ups and downs of his career? Where would he do things the same
No,
in
of course.
Toronto that he did, that he's doing now? Like we'll see how he does in Pittsburgh,
There's
which
always a
is
learning
a tough
curve. There's
job.
there's always a learning curve, and that's why I say like, how is having an older coach a bad thing? Because think about all the experience that they could have, gone through and all the things they could have learned throughout their career. So that's why I just people say, oh, talk it too old of old of a coach. Like most NHL coaches in the league are between ages like 50
55
and
and 60. Yeah,
65. Like
yeah,
nobody, like usually the big names are not like 30 years old to your point, right?
yeah,
So yeah, just that whole thing of like, oh well, you need a young coach. Like that's bullshit, man, in my
yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. I think there are a few good options out there, and if the Flyers don't land Tocchet, I'm sure we're going to hear those names pop up more aggressively, and probably this is what's holding up the hire in general. Is most likely they've been doing interviews and they want to see if they can get their top candidate, and if they can't, they'll move on and probably make a decision on the next candidates. So,
Yeah, yeah.
we will see. But I expect that if this came out publicly, the decision is probably looming. So we'll see if maybe by this time next week, we'll have something to talk about on the podcast. All right. I want to talk a little bit about the offseason. There has been a new announcement. This came from Elliot Friedman today. I took a screenshot, so I'm just going to pull this up real quick. So new arbitration rules have come up in adjustment to not rules, but new stack in accordance with
Yeah, it's
the
like offer
increase
sheet compensation, right?
compensation in accordance with the rise in salaries. So it seems like everything's kind of gone up. So this matters for arbitration, or not arbitration. I'm sorry, for RFAs. So for all those people who think that RFA signings are going to be big this year, might be. But I'm just going to read them out real quick. So compensation for nothing is 1.544 million or less. And then over 1.544 million to 2.34 million is a third round pick. 2.34 million to 4.68 million is a second round pick. 4.680 to 7.020 million is a first round and a third round. Oh, I'm sorry. The last one was a second round pick. And then over 7.020 million to 9.36 million is a first, a second, and a third round pick. And a reminder, these have to be your team's first, second, third, or picks. They can't belong to another team. You can still trade for your pick back, similar to what St. Louis had to do. And then the 9.36 to million to 11.7 million, two first, one second, and one third, and then anything over 11.7 million, four first round picks. So high prices still remain, but the numbers have at least shifted. I would say if the Flyers are interested in doing an RFA, I see it kind of sitting around that second round pick, the 2.34 million to 4.68 million range. I think that's their safest bet, not knowing how good they will be next year. You don't want to necessarily risk the potential of not getting your, top 5, top 10 pick, because they still could be, look at what the Islanders did this year, right? They were a top 10 pick and moved up to first overall. So you don't want to necessarily risk that on any of the RFAs available right now. So I could see the Flyers willing to risk a second round pick though. Especially with two first round picks the following year. They could always trade that Toronto first round pick to get another first round pick or an early second round pick or something like that. What are your thoughts, Vasili?
Yeah, I think just in terms of the changes, if you look at like what the Flyers might do with RFAs and offer sheets, I don't think this really, is going to shift their mentality much. Like there's obviously been rumors that they might be willing to do it. I just think it's going to naturally come down to, does the player want to sign? Like if you're a team and you're trying to make a move like this, it's all about, are you going to actually be able to get the player to sign the offer sheet? That's the main thing, right? If they don't want to leave their situation or where they are, no matter how much you want to try to poach them from the team, it's not going to happen, right? So that's the main crux to it all. If I'm Philadelphia, like to your point, I wouldn't want to risk that first because there's no guarantee you're going to be really any better next season, just looking at the roster, unless your whole goal this season is to add so much that you're essentially like cementing yourself as a playoff team. Whereas like you're, let's say paying a first and a third to get a guy that is going to be 100% like a second or a first line center for you. And you're going out and making like big ads in free agency, which I don't think, any of that is set on the table or is going to be promised if we're like looking at what they're trying to do and how they're trying to build the roster. Like I think, they do want to add this offseason, but I don't think they want, all eggs into one basket or anything. So I think to your point, like the chance we see an offer sheet probably slim. It's like every season, right? Like when do you really see a lot of offer sheets? It's not very often. It's because of things like this. a lot of the times it can be too risky based on what you might be getting back potentially and how much you have to pay, right? And that's the reason why these prices are so high. So
Yeah, and they have three RFAs to worry about of their own with York, Cates, and Forrester. The only names that I could see getting like the high billings, obviously Evan Bouchard is out there. He could end up getting a very big contract. I think Gabe Velarde might be around like that, like $6 to $7 million range. John Jason Paterka, JJ Paterka. He had an excellent season this year. I could see
really
him
good. Yeah.
maybe getting somewhere around like that 7 million range. Marco Rossi probably around that $6 million range. Matthew Nyes, the way he's playing in the playoffs, and I think how much he's coveted in general right now, and that is one of the teams that's kind of up against the cap. So I could see an RFA for Nyes come out there. I think he said he's welcomed it as well. That could be a guy that I could see. You'd have to give up a first, a second, and a third to sign, which is a hefty toll, but a very good player. Most of these guys on these RFA lists will not make it to
Yeah,
even,
look, be signed
yeah,
exactly
yeah,
before
they
that
won't.
can even be a
Right.
situation. So
Yeah. Though the options I did think about though, and I brought this up to you through text, there's one guy in Cam York that he's not solidified himself for a long-term contract with the Flyers. He is the most likely of the three to get a bridge deal. As far as where the organization kind of sees him, where he is a valuable player in the organization, they're clearly high on him. They're not looking to move him out. But when I look at a guy like Bowen Byram out there, and I look at the fact that he hired new representation, moved his stuff out of Buffalo. There's strong rumors that he does not want to return to the Buffalo Sabres. And I look at that as an option for the Flyers to be like, hey, you might be losing Byram, but we'll give you Cam York. Plus, you'd have to probably add some. I don't know. Maybe it's York and a second round pick for a Bowen Byram. We do know the Flyers were interested in Byram in return for Cutter Gauthier, which I would bet that if Colorado revisited that deal, they probably would have done that deal, looking the way things worked out for them with Casey Middlestat.
yeah.
That's probably a deal they would have wanted. So I think a guy like York could be enough to get Byram because then they get a top four defenseman back. Different type of defenseman, but they get a guy back who can play in their top four, and then an additional piece, and they don't lose anything. Especially if Byram doesn't want to sign there. I think that would be a guy that the Flyers should invest to trade for. He's a more offensive defenseman. He's got lots of size. He's a guy that they've coveted for a long time, and he actually might be available. He's got a higher offensive upside than York. He's a little bit bigger. He's 2 inches bigger than York. He's a little bit younger than York. Actually maybe no, they're same age. They're both 23. Um, so and Byron will be 24 next season. So I don't know. I see it as like this could be an opportunity for the Flyers. I would hope, and this is where my head's at. I would hope that this is what they look for. And then the other option, and I'll let you comment in a second here, Vasili. Sorry. The other option is a guy like Marco Rossi. You look at the fact that Minnesota can't seem to make a decision on him. He also might want more money than they're willing to give him. And that might be an opportunity to move a guy like York for Rossi. The only problem with there is that they seem to have several defensemen in their system. Obviously, Zeev Buium being one of them that kind of meets the need for a guy like York. So I don't know if they'd be as interested in swapping a defenseman for a forward. But that does at least usually equate with like a defenseman for a center, where it's a lot harder to offer like a winger for a center. It's usually center for center or defenseman for center or something like that.
Yeah, I think like if the Flyers are going to trade York, it'll probably be because they have a tough time in negotiations with him and signing him and being able to, settle on a contract and what they think their future is with him with this team. So maybe if things have soured, it becomes, something that is easier, right? Than having to go through those types of negotiations, maybe even going to arbitration. They'd rather avoid that and then just try to move him for another asset, just in the sense that If you look at York and what he was supposed to do for them on the power play when they drafted him, he hasn't really been that same guy as he was for the USN TDP, though he hasn't really gotten much of a chance to do it. He hasn't really been given like extended looks on the power play these last couple of seasons or anything. But for Byram, like it's an interesting idea. I think like if you're the Flyers, you really need somebody that can run your power play. It's abysmal. It hasn't been good at all. He's a guy that's shown that he can, be that guy who could quarterback a power play and be successful at it. And be a good facilitator of the puck. So just with him not really look like he wants to sign in Buffalo, maybe that's a swap the Flyers be willing to go for with York, just because York's probably maybe more defensively reliable, but doesn't seem to have that offensive production that Byram does right now, right? Just in terms of the last couple seasons anyway. So we'll see what happens. I think for Rossi too, it would be similar, right? It's like if Minnesota's having a tough time signing Rossi and the Flyers are having a tough time signing York, maybe both teams think, hey, let's flip these guys for one another. We're both filling
Yep.
needs that we potentially have. So we'll have to see for both, but it's interesting ideas. I think both these guys have been rumored to the Flyers in the past, so we know that there probably is some interest from them. So we'll see for them, but we'll see what happens. I think if you were gonna trade York, ideally, at least in my idea or my mind, you'd probably want to have a younger guy coming back with upside, whether it's a defenseman or a center, but somebody who's of a similar age. Like I don't think you want to be trading him for a veteran or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, I can't see that happening. It's more of like, York looking for a fresh start, Byram looking for a fresh
Yeah,
start.
yeah.
I don't
Rossi
think,
maybe too.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I don't think Noah Dobson, who's an RFA, that Edmonton has any interest in moving him. I'm sorry, Evan Bouchard for Edmonton. I can't see them moving, and Noah Dobson for the Islanders
Yeah, yeah.
is rumored to be moving, so maybe that's an option too. Though I think now with the new GM at the helm, I assume Dobson's probably going to stay now. But the fact that I heard that Byram's like moved his stuff out of Buffalo, it's like there's most likely a trade imminent. They have a couple other guys in power and Sandy or not Sandine,
Darlene.
Darlene, that can continue to be top pairing defenseman there. So I think he is a piece they could move. And York being an American kid, I don't know if he's going to want to go back to the West Coast or something like that, but he won't have much of a say. He's not,
Yeah, he
you
won't
know,
have leverage in where he goes
yeah.
really at this
I
point. So
I just think this,
neither of these players will really.
yeah,
Like they're pretty much under team control. If they're gonna get traded, like it's gonna be to whoever
yeah.
wants them or gives the best offer,
I
right?
I will say though, I would heavily pursue this trade if I was the Flyers. York for Byram. We probably would have to pay Byram a little bit more than what we'd have to pay York, but I think it's worth it if you look at the combination. Because like then I could see I can look at that top pairing now, with a guy who's 6'1" rather than 5'11".
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
and those 2 inches are a little bit bigger. Again, more offensive guy. We need more offense for the back end. I just think it creates a little bit a better balance in the back end. And for a guy who's had some big offensive numbers, but has not really found his way to being a top pairing quite yet into the NHL, where like York is not on paper a top pairing, but he's played a top pairing role here. So, we move Byram into the top pairing role here, and then York moves into the top four, potentially even playing top pairing with Buffalo. So I don't know if they'd be interested, but that is definitely a trade I would pursue. If Byram is available out there, that's the exact type of guy I'd look for, especially with this upcoming draft being forward heavy. You're most likely gonna solve some of your forward problems in this draft. Why not be able to be like, okay, we got that bigger defenseman, which we know the Flyers want bigger defensemen, and 6'1" is a much more ideal size. The only weird thing is that York and Drysdale are like best friends, but I don't think that's stopped the Flyers before when they traded Frost and Farabee.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you're in the NHL. If you're friends with guys on the team, it is what it is, right? It's a professional sport. Gotta
Yeah,
get over it, man.
yeah,
You're getting paid millions, so.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's take a quick break. Just want to remind everybody, please, to like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for notifications to get notified when we release these episodes. Um, and again, best way to support our show is to like, subscribe, If you share it out, that's awesome too. For the audio version, go to Spotify and iTunes and give us a like and a follow on those as well. And if you can give us a rating there, that's also humongous help. Again, the best way to support our show. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the upcoming draft. I've been doing my research. I don't know how much research you've done, Vasili. I just want to see, has your opinion really shifted as far as who's your ideal guy for the Flyers to take in the draft? Again, we're going to do much more in-depth segments as we get closer. And again, we have the big episode with Steve on June 17th. We might move that episode up, but as of right now, it's going to stay June 17th because Vasili's getting married at the end of May. So we want to give him a little bit of breathing room there. And it's also, we'll have it ready, a week in advance of the draft. So you have plenty of time to kind of listen to it and digest, wait for the hype to build up. But as of right now, the tiers kind of remain the same. Schaefer, Misa being kind of the 1A, 1B. Misa being the number 2 most likely player to go in the draft. Schaefer number 1. There's a James Hagen's, rumors. I can't see the Islanders picking a guy just because he's from the island, because he's from Long Island. Having said that, crazier things have happened. And Hagens is a damn good prospect in his own right. But the tier remains with Hagens, Frondell, Denoyer, and Porter Martone all being in that second tier. And then the third tier really being a mix of players. And then Roger McQueen probably should be a second tier guy, but with his injury issues, this is why I brought up the combine earlier. That will probably shift things very slightly for draft rankings. And really, Roger McQueen and not Braden Coots, who's the other guy. Oh man, his name is escaping me right now. I got to look up the name. But there are 2 big players on the list. Man, I had it open earlier and I closed it, and that was stupid. But essentially, Roger McQueen being the biggest one because they want to find out what his status is with his back. That's an injury that could really hinder his draft rankings, where he probably should be taken in the top 6, top 7 of this draft, but really could drop anywhere to 15, maybe even 20, just with the uncertainty of what could happen with his back moving forward. I will say this, and it's not a very reliable thing, but I tried it anyway. I did put in Roger McQueen to ChatGPT, and I asked it the question based off of his injury history, other injuries similar. What is the likelihood of him being able to have a successful NHL career? And ChatGPT kind of gave it a 70 to 80% chance that he could play in the NHL healthy for 5 to 7 years, for a 5 to 7 year mark. So 70 to 80% chance that he, is a healthy player in the NHL, being his size. So that's where the combine could change stuff. But Vasily, I'll ask you this. Oh, the other player, by the way, is Carter Bear, who tore his Achilles.
Yeah.
A very high-end prospect. Probably would be also maybe number 9 on the list, number 8 on the list. And he's a guy who could drop to 15, 16 because of the Achilles, could drop even lower. Because that's a very serious injury. It's ended players' careers before. So he also might be a guy that's available later. But we'll talk about the secondary picks after this. But has your opinion for the top pick changed? Do you have guys that you prefer, what you hope falls to us?
Nothing's really changed. I think the biggest need for the Flyers is center. For me, like I was saying, I haven't really gotten the chance to dig in completely yet, but just watching Frondell, Hagens, I think if you're looking at what the Flyers need, they need a center. If one of those 2 guys are available at 6, I think you have to take either. That's my opinion. I think just looking at what you need and what is the most important and crucial thing to building your roster going forward, it is center depth. Both these guys project to be, if not first line, for sure second line or top 6 centers. So I think it's just a no-brainer. If any of those guys are there, you have to go with either, Frondell or Hagens, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I'm with you there, and Denoyer as well. I'm really hoping that I think Hagens is probably the tougher of the names of those 3 for us to get.
Oh yeah, but there's been rumors like his stock has dropped like crazy. So who really
Right.
knows, right?
I even talked to Steve through text, and he was like, every year that there are like complete curveballs. Also, remember the draft. Always teams tend to prioritize size and strength over if guys are even in their
Yeah.
eyes or close. They'll usually prioritize size and strength. So guys who have kind of bigger bodies than Hagens could get the nudge. Where even like Frondell is not like that tall. He's like 6'1.5", but he is very strong on his skates. And the teams picking above us, like looking at them on paper, probably would prioritize those things. I'm still in the camp where I'm really hoping it's either Frondell or Hagens. I'm very comfortable with Denoyer at this point. Um, I'm that's kind of how I see it. And I also see the option of like if Porter Martone ends up being the guy, the only thing that makes me hesitate is that he's kind of falls under that Noel Patrick camp where not because of injuries or anything, but because he's very old for his age group, where he's an October birthday and
And he's
they're
a winger. So
right. But you know what? I thought about that, but I was like, you know what though? Yes, it's not the most ideal thing, but if he's the best player available,
yeah,
we
at
got
that
a guy who
position.
is ranked third and we get him at 6, it's still a win. You know, we
No, yeah.
our goal is to get high end talent. That's where I see the Brady Martin thing. I'm like, I think the Flyers liked Brady Martin if they were drafting like 10, 11.
Yeah.
I don't think that they are crazy to pass up higher end talent where that is really the goal. While his hitting is appealing and all of that, you know, we heard that with Leonard too. And the Flyers didn't go for Leonard instead of Michkov. They went for Michkov. And I expect that again this year is that they go for the player that they believe is the highest ceiling.
Yeah,
And that is top priority.
I think that's a key theme though with this regime with Briere at least, like just being at the drafts in general, they don't seem like they're hesitant to take swings on guys that they believe meet their criteria of high-end talent.
Yeah.
So I think they wouldn't be, scared to do or make a move like that. Like for me, like even Desnoyers, like I think could be potentially a decent option. My only thing with him is like I always get wary of the QMJHL versus the
Yeah,
other
yeah, yeah.
leagues. It
Same.
is the weakest. There's a reason why it's the weakest. Like he's put up great points in that league, but does it compare to the NCAA, for example, right? Like a Hagens is playing in, or does it compare to like the other junior leagues? That's my only hesitation.
It
But
doesn't.
yeah, exactly, right? So like my thing is if you have the ability to have one of those, guys that were ranked in that top five and whether they were ranked, 2, 3, 4, 5 or whatever, or because some people have the rankings all over the place, right? In
Yeah.
terms of Frondell, Hagens, and Martone.
I've
I
seen
think if
Frondell
any
as low as 8.
that's what I mean. I think if any of those three guys are available, the Flyers are in pretty good shape. So for me, the center is obviously ideal because you need centers, and that's kind of like the weakness in terms of the depth of your prospect pool right now. But if the best player available happens to be Martone, and the other option is the center in Desnoyers, I think you have to draft best player, not for positional need in that situation. So
Yeah. And again, it depends on what they see the difference as. So we will see. Um, I'm pretty comfortable with where we're drafting at this point that I believe we're going to get a good player. I would be upset
of
if they
course, top ten,
I did
yeah.
view Martin, and not that I don't like him. It's not like I look at Martin as being like, "Oh, this isn't." It's just like, "Okay, this is like a top 6 forward option." Where I'm like, I'm looking for a top line option. So I would hope the Flyers continue to carry that because they know we have top 6 forwards in the organization. That's not the issue. The issue is finding a guy who can be a top line player. And maybe they don't see any of these guys as top line players that we're talking about in tier 2, but I doubt that to be the case. The other names that interest me that I think the Flyers have a chance at in the secondary, like their later pick, especially the Colorado pick, which could be as low as 23, I think, at this point. I'm not 100% sure. We'll see but it'll be like 22 to 25 range. A guy like Benjamin Kindle had 99 points, 65 games. He's a right winger, though. But again, I wouldn't be completely opposed to it. And then Cole Reshney, 92 points in the WHL, 26 goals, 66 assists. There are other candidates in here that I looked at and that I think are interesting players. So we're going to learn more about this draft as we move forward. Myself, Vasili, and again, by the time we talk to Steve, we're going to know a lot more. Remember that whatever's like affecting like that's where I was like thinking about Porter Martone. It's like, okay, if we took Porter Martone, we have a chance to draft a center at 25 still, right?
Yeah,
So like,
for sure.
or even package those two trades. And if a guy like Roger McQueen drops, to like 18, 19, 20, we have an option to trade, one of the first and a second, or one of the, or both first to move up to grab a center, right? So the Flyers do have options, and that's what this is all about, is just having like the leverage. The other guy that I think could throw a complete wrench in all of this is Radim Merka. He is the big defenseman out of the WHL. Played 43 games this year. 3 goals, 32 assists, 35 points, and in 43 games. And again, this is kind of where I go back to saying size is a huge thing. He's a 6'6" defenseman who projects to be a top 4 defenseman. We watched what happened last year with Beckett Seneca, and how, him just being a big body, like a Porter Martone type of guy, move all the way up to 3. I could see a world where a team needs a defenseman, maybe like Seattle, and they're like, we're going with Merca, and then everything gets thrown out the window, right? And if a guy
Yeah,
like
one
that
off the
moves
board
up,
pick can change things for sure.
right?
So
And I suspect that it could happen this year with how volatile the second and third tier is in this draft, and how many guys have been interchangeable. And obviously, like even a guy like Eklund, who is supposed to be a second tier guy, has been dropping to now third tier. But how many teams actually agree with that? And if anybody watched the episodes with Steve that we had previously, we talked about Eklund, and he was still very high on Eklund and Frondell. And, he was saying that, like, don't let anybody fool you. I remember that. He's like, these
yeah,
guys are high end players. So, at this point, everybody's going to be bashing certain players, but this actually does seem like a pretty deep draft. And still a deep draft. What it lacks is a franchise, and this happens every time when there's no franchise caliber player that's obvious, like a Bedard, right at the top of the list.
yeah. It's called a weak draft
Yeah,
usually.
it's called a weak draft, where like 2003 didn't have a single one of those players, yet every team ended up with an all-star from that
Well,
draft.
just look at Elias Pettersson, Heischer, Patrick, Makar draft that was touted to be weak at the time, and then look at all the
And
superstars
best,
that came out
yeah, best
of that
defenseman in
draft.
the NHL was in that draft.
I
And
mean, any draft, the jury's out, really. Like, you have to wait 5 years. That's typically
yeah,
like a safe bet, right? To be able to see where did these guys fall. So we'll see what happens. But the best thing for the Flyers is they have a lot, like you said, a lot of leverage and a lot of picks. So if you do want to make moves or move up for certain players, potentially in second round, first round, you might be able to pull something like that off with those picks. So
yeah, but I feel comfortable. Congratulations to the 76ers who moved up from 5. They had to stay at least 6th in their lottery to not lose their first round pick. They moved up to 3 from 5, so the exact opposite, and they had a chance at the first overall. So, and again, the NBA draft is like the biggest crapshoot ever. Like, if you actually look at the records of those drafts, like it's much harder than basketball or than hockey. Like hockey, you can pretty much get a good player 50% chance in the first round. NBA, it's got to be closer to like 20%. Um, so good for them. But I think the Flyers, where they sit at 6th, is a comfortable number 6 spot, where no matter what, we're walking away with a blue chip prospect, and potentially 2 or even 3 of them, um, depending on how the Flyers make out. Because I could see this being a draft where the Flyers walk away with enough to rebuild their entire prospect pool and move them up to being like a top 3 prospect pool in the NHL after this year. So we'll see. Okay, anything you want to add there on the draft?
no, not much for me, but good discussion.
Yeah. All right, let's move into playoff talk, and then we'll wrap up with the Phantoms. I'm going to share my screen. We'll do what we've done previously, where we bring up the bracket. So we're down to the final four teams.
And yeah, once again, I'll caveat, if you're listening to my predictions, you probably shouldn't be. So yeah.
So far, I have gotten every prediction right in the first round. I was 100%. And the second round, I'm off by one right
I'm
now.
pretty like my predictions. What I said, Florida would win. I said Washington would win. I said Vegas. I said Dallas. So I got two maybe. I mean, I just want to see chaos, really. That like I
Okay.
just want to see the most entertaining
I get
stuff.
it.
So for me, like that's why my picks are kind of off the wall. That Washington Carolina series I've been watching. Like the last game was tough. I thought Washington was going to come back and tie it up, and then
Yeah.
Carolina just kept what the last like 5 minutes, like those two back-to-back goals were backbreakers. Like I think at least at this point, it looks like Carolina's probably safely going to take it. The
Yeah.
most interesting series right now is obviously the Leafs in Florida. Leafs go up 2-0. Florida comes back, wins two in Florida, which I mean, I think everybody thought was kind of inevitable, just knowing the way the Leafs operate with leads in series. Like you look at the Ottawa series in the last round, kind of the same thing happening. I think for them, it's unfortunate because I think if it was Stolarz in net, I think they actually probably would have won one of the games in Florida. I think Wool's been a little bit underwhelming. Not necessarily the last game. I thought he played pretty well, but the game beforehand. So we'll see. It sucks for Stolarz because it's like his first real chance getting to be like a starter on this type of stage, and then he gets concussed. So hopefully he can
Yeah.
make a return for them because he was playing lights out before he got hurt. So
Yeah. I would suspect if you're throwing up on the bench, though, after a hit,
concussed, man.
yeah,
Concussed.
I
Yeah.
mean, you're probably done for the playoffs, too. So they're going to have to go with Wall probably for the remainder, even if they move
Which I think
on to
that
the
might
finals.
I think to be honest, that might be the difference because if I'm Florida, right? Like they were having a tough time scoring on Stolarz and Wall. They've been able to put up like five spots on him or four or five goals essentially. So
Yeah. Yeah, so Carolina Washington's going essentially how I thought. It's pretty even. I could see Washington winning another game here. Maybe even two, but I do see Carolina finishing it out. I still have Florida beating Toronto. I
I
think
think it's
Toronto
seven
is
games though, right?
yeah, I could see that. I think Toronto's done a very admirable job fending off the former champs. I just think Florida is just they're a tough team. They're gonna have to. Toronto could still win it, but it's like they have to adjust to the physicality of Florida, and I think that's what hurt them in Game 4 a little bit. That and obviously not scoring a goal is like that's not their strength, right? They're like a high flying offense, so they need to beat Bob. So we'll see. It's a whole new series now, going back to Toronto where they won both of their first games. So if they take a lead here, they have a serious chance. So this game, their game five is huge, absolutely huge. On the other side, Winnipeg had a pretty good game too. Obviously, they beat Dallas. Dallas took both of the other games. Mikko Rantanen is putting up a legendary performance right now. He's like almost 2 points a game, just crushing it. And from what I understand, Heiskanen is most likely going to be playing in the next game. So I do think Dallas does finish this out. I still think it could go six, but I could see Dallas going up 3-1 after the next game, and maybe Winnipeg gets another one. I thought they played better than they did last round against St. Louis against Dallas, but I do think that Dallas is just the better team.
Yeah, Dallas, I think just is the depth, right, is crazy, especially now. If they get Heiskanen back, and then you obviously have added Rantanen, he's just on a whole nother level. Since like the probably third or fourth game of the first round, right? Like he started off a little bit slow, gets the hat trick, and then he's just been like lights out since that point. And he's pretty much like you said, 2 points a game, which is crazy to think about in the playoffs against but two really good teams. It's not like they're playing teams that aren't good or like playing teams that are just squeaked into the playoffs or anything. Firstly, you could have lost to Colorado easily, and Winnipeg is the top team in the league. So they're
Yeah.
doing it against the best teams in their conference right now, and division, obviously. I would say for that, Dallas series, I think they're obviously going to close it out. The only way I think Winnipeg wins it though, like Hellebuyck did get a shutout, really good goaltender. If he gets hot, I mean, and it
Yeah.
becomes a brick wall for them, you really never know. That could be a difference maker. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
He's their
I think,
MVP. Yeah.
yeah, I think that this will still go like 6 games. I think Dallas in 6 games. And for Edmonton and Vegas, I'm kind of really surprised, to be honest, because I saw Pickard go down, obviously. And then I was talking to some buddies just saying, the way Skinner was playing, it's kind of hilarious that if you're an Edmonton fan, you're like, oh my God, Pickard's hurt. Like, wow, like that's like the end for us because Skinner was playing so bad. And then he comes in, he's been lights out since he entered. So I was totally off base. Like I thought that Edmonton's goaltending woes would kind of unravel them in this round. It's been the opposite where Vegas hasn't been able to really get a save from Aiden Hill. He's kind of um a lot of the momentum, I would say, in that series is from what I've watched. When they've needed a save, he hasn't been able to come up with it, whereas Edmonton's goalies have. So I think it's kind of been like a flip of the script for them.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll say this about Edmonton. If they beat Dallas, I expect them to win the Stanley Cup. Because it looks like they're going to move on here. They have a 3-1 series lead. Vegas is no pushover of a team.
No, they're really good.
They won 4 games in a row against LA. If Dallas can't stop them, and let's say they play Florida or Carolina in the finals, I suspect they're going to win.
Well,
Just
they seem
because,
motivated for sure.
right?
So
Yeah, and again, it's so hard, no matter what you think of the Oilers, to bet against McDavid and Draisaitl. When a guy like McDavid just takes over a game. Like he is the best player of this generation for a reason. He's the closest thing we've
it's
had since
unstoppable,
Lemieux.
essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
since Lemieux, Gretzky, like he's an unstoppable force, like you said. And the fact that he has Draisaitl there to also be that, type of player. But I do think Dallas has more depth than Edmonton has dealt with so far. And they have Rantanen, who's been insanely good.
Yeah.
He has like crazy amount of points.
Well, that's
Um,
the thing. That's the thing too, right? Ranting in all their depth, and I would say, like the goaltending. Like if you look at who Edmonton's faced the last 2 rounds. I mean, Kemper with
right.
The Kings, obviously not on the level of an Ottinger. Pickard and Skinner definitely, or like on Edmonton's side, also not on the level of an Ottinger, just from their perspective. And then Vegas, Aiden Hill wouldn't be on that level. So I think if Dallas was going to do it and beat them, I think that goaltending edge might be able to, put them over the top against
Yeah.
a team like the
Plus,
Oilers.
yeah. Plus, they're deeper than the Oilers, and the way Rantanen is playing right now, like while McDavid is insane, Rantanen's outplaying him, at least from a point production standpoint. So it's gonna be very interesting. I will say it would be hilarious from an outside view if Vegas plays Florida and Florida beats them again.
Yeah, that would be funny.
That would be funny. I'm not saying that they deserve it, but just watching it would be funny. Because everything that Dallas has, Florida has. So, like the same depth, the D depth, the goaltending, the forward depth, Florida
Oh, I
also
was gonna
has
say if
it.
Edmonton goes up against Florida and loses again, that would be tough for them for sure.
Yeah.
But I could see it. I mean, Florida's the chance for a reason. Like they're a really tough team. You add Marchand in there too, and the additions that they've made, they're even more stacked. But I'll say we've been spoiled this playoffs. It's been really good hockey. It's probably been one of the most fun Stanley Cup playoffs I've watched
What
in the last like 5 years, I'd say.
Yeah, it's been great. And it would be a really interesting one if somehow Toronto went to the
Yeah,
finals and
Toronto,
played
Edmonton, or
Edmonton.
something. Yeah,
That like it's not good for US hockey. It's great for Canadian hockey. Amazing for Canadian hockey because they
just
haven't
for
won a
the
championship.
game in
But
yeah for the
the
game in
high
general.
flying offenses, you know what I
McDavid
mean?
versus Matthews, just for
Yeah.
marketing too. So
Yeah. So I could still see this going Dallas, Florida. And that's a crazy matchup.
that also would be really good hockey.
But
So
yeah.
either way, we'd be spoiled.
Yeah, the only teams left that I can't see winning the cup are Winnipeg and Washington. Not that that's too strong of a word. But the only teams I think are like in a lower category than the other
Yeah.
teams. But all the teams are capable of winning the Stanley Cup that are remaining. So we will see. We will see. All right, let's end it here on the Phantoms playoffs. So Phantoms lost in Game 5. They lost
Disappointing.
Yeah, they lost
Yeah.
Parker Gahagan uh, for the last 2.5 games of the series. Peterson did play well in his relief game, didn't give up a goal. But then the Phantoms he gave up 6 goals in his first starting game, and then gave up 4 in the second. Did not play well, didn't play horrendously either. I wouldn't say it's completely his fault, but
No.
it was clearly the difference maker in the series. Um, Hershey was already a really good team. They're arguably a better team than the Phantoms. The Phantoms took it to them, at least they took it to the final game, best of 5.
It was
And
competitive.
they
It was
fought back in
competitive.
both games, but I think goaltending was the difference maker in this one.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty clear that you look at the way the fans were playing, just in terms of the confidence and just even like defensively as well. The way they were playing in front of Gehagen as a unit versus Peterson, I think you could easily see that there's more confidence in one goalie than the other. Like, and we see this with the Flyers too, right? Like when you're a team and you're not confident in who's back there, sometimes it can cause you to play in a different way. You're trying to stop mistakes from happening versus playing freer and playing open. And I think that is an aspect of it, but it's also too like when the Phantoms needed a big save from Peterson, he was not able to provide that at the key moments. Whereas Gehagen, we saw him do that in the first 2 games where Hershey was played really well the first 2 games. And there was times where Gehagen was making some big stops to keep the Phantoms in the lead and with the momentum. And Peterson just didn't have the ability to do that for them. He really hasn't been had the ability to do that for this organization since he's kind of entered and when they traded for him, right? Like he's never been that guy, even when they brought him up and had him in some NHL action when they were looking for him to make that
He hasn't
save that
been
they
good. He
needed.
hasn't been good at all in his
No,
time
yeah.
here.
He really hasn't been good. Very underwhelming. It sucks for the fans because I do think if Gehagen was in, I think they might have been able to close this one out. I think it still would have gone to a game 5 here because I think Hershey would have won another game, like just them being, the upper echelon team that they are in the AHL. But I think with a guy like Gehagen, the Phantoms and the team playing in front of him firstly had more faith in him in net to make that type of save. And then that just ends up, in better results for the skaters on the ice playing more free, playing the tempo, up tempo style that they want to play. Um, Despite the loss, though, right? Like a lot of encouraging things to take away. Like I think if you look at Jet Lachenko's play, one of the top scorers throughout the AHL playoffs so far, just in
Yeah.
terms of what he was able to do. Alex Bump, though he didn't get on the score sheet a ton over the playoff stretch, there were still a lot of chances for him. He was getting pucks towards the net. Some good playoff experience in general from some of the younger prospects in the Flyers organization. So it's not all a bad thing. It's disappointing in the sense that I think if you have Gehagen in there, probably or potentially a different result. So
Yeah, or potentially Kolosov, who probably should have been the backup to Gehagen at the very least.
yeah, that's definitely the puzzling one where you'd think you would want a guy that's supposedly one of your best goaltending prospects in the AHL during a playoff run. So definitely that also is frustrating because if you would have had him in there versus a Peterson, would it also have been potentially a different result, right?
I think potentially yes, and they weren't going to throw Bjarnason in for his first pro
Yeah,
game
that's not
in
a
an
smart development.
elimination game. Yeah,
Dude, yeah, for a goalie's development, like that's how you ruin a goalie's
yeah,
career very
to
early. Like
to
if you would have put him in against them and he got lit up like 5-6-0, his career could be over. Like you could have shattered the kid's whole confidence before he even played a pro game. You can't do that. That would be stupid. And that's why
to
they didn't do that because they know what they're doing in terms of how to handle that situation, right? Like
yeah,
most teams wouldn't throw a top tier prospect in there like that. No way.
100%. Let me just before we end, let me just read out the ending stats for some of the players.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
Anthony Richard, team MVP in the playoffs. He had 4 goals, 3 assists, +6 rating. Jacob Gauthier, he had 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points in 7 games, +4 rating. Ule Lixel, 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 assists in 7 games. He was an even rating. Emil Andre, 6 assists in 7 games, -1. Luchenko, 6 assists, 7th game. And remember, Luchenko is 18 years old.
That's what I mean, which is nice.
Yeah, didn't shoot the puck enough, only 10 shots on net, but he did hit the post a couple times in the playoffs too. He definitely could have walked away with being a complete point a game. Zayd Wisdom, 3 goals, 1 assist, 4 points, +5 in 7 games. Very nice to see. Helge Grans, -2, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points in 7 games. Nikita Gabrankin, he was an even plus minus, 1 goal, 3 assists, 4 points in 7 games. Yinning had 3 assists, a -2 in 7. Rodrigo Abels, 2 goals, -1. Alex Bump, 2 goals, no assists, -3 in the series. Everybody, there was a few other players with 1 point, but or I'm sorry, Garrett Wilson had a goal and assist also. It was even 29 penalty minutes, which is like crazy. And that's the other thing I think really hurt the Phantoms. He took way too many penalties, like
Yeah, they were
way too many.
undisciplined.
Very undisciplined.
Well, you just,
Um,
I mean, it felt like at least like those games where Hershey got back into it, they were on the penalty kill for a
like
large majority of the games.
it
So,
was like they literally were like 5-on-3. There was one
but that's
play they were on
opening.
a 5-on-3 and then took a penalty immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
Andre took a penalty immediately after the 5-on-3. It was 4 minutes of pure power play, 5-on-3
And,
to 4-on-3
and
or
that's opening
5-on-2,
yourself up
5-on-4.
to, even
It's
like tougher
momentum
competition.
killing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
momentum killing, but also like your goalie in the net at this point isn't your top option, so that's only going to open it up more to the other team to potentially score, right? So
Yeah. So unfortunate end, but good battle for the Phantoms. We'll see how they do next year. They're obviously going to have more players part of this, like Denver Barkey and Oliver Bonk will be
yeah,
part of this equation next year, and the Phantoms will be probably mostly returning. There might be some rebuilds. We don't know what's going on with Excel. We don't know what's going on with Ables. We don't know what's going on with Belpedio. So maybe some new names on there. We shall see. Other guys will also take a larger role next year, like Ethan Sansom will probably have a larger role. Kabrankin probably will start off in the minors, right? So we have like other guys that are still making a name for themselves. I assume Zayd Wisdom has earned himself a contract also with how well he's played in the second half of this year. He went from being completely forgettable to being one of the best prospects in the Flyers farm system. So I also thought was a big success. So thank you, Phantoms. Good playoff run
yeah, it was a good
overall.
season for them.
Yeah, could have been much worse of a season the way it started. Ended up pretty positive in the end, and I think Leperrier kind of bought himself a little bit of confidence. I don't think he's being selected for the Flyers coach. I don't think that's happening at all, but I do think he's earned a vote of confidence from a lot of fans that believe that maybe he could be the right coach beyond what the organization thinks, that maybe he is the right coach for this team right now. And we'll see how he does next year. He's got to do at least what he did, if not better, next year. So, all right, that's it for us. Anything you want to add, Vasili?
Just for everybody listening, obviously in the off season, there's not a lot of Flyers news or anything like that, so we appreciate the support.
Yeah.
And we see all the likes and all the views and everything. So keep it up, and we're gonna try to keep pushing the content throughout the summer here.
Yeah. 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 Thank you, everybody, for the support. We've had great support. I was just checking online here to see if there was any official word on Tocchet or anything like that.
Yeah, imagine we record this whole episode and it's like he got announced as the
Yeah,
Flyers head coach
I wanted
at
to
the
make
end. That'd be hilarious.
I wanted to make sure it wasn't like an announcement here. It doesn't look like it quite yet. Yeah, just everybody, thank you all for the support. You guys have been awesome. Really trying to grow this show. So again, if you haven't liked it or subscribed or give us a rating on the audio version or followed us there, please do so. We could definitely use more ratings on the audio version, and all the likes definitely. The likes get us recommended to other people. So the more likes we have, the more interactions we have, the more our show gets spread on YouTube. So please do so if you haven't done that so far. And also shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to go get yourself a cheesesteak from Jim's. They have one of the best, if not the best, cheesesteak in Philadelphia. Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560. Go to them for your insurance adjustment needs. They will help facilitate the process between you and your insurance company and make sure you get the best claim possible. And also shout out to sportspider.com. They are our partners. They aggregate sports content from all over the internet and organize them by your favorite teams. And again, the link is in the description of this video and the description of the audio as well. Sportspider.com. Make sure to check them out. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Vasili, thank you for being awesome as always. We love you guys. And remember, always stay